It was Joe's first day in Sydney. As she was getting off the plane on this foggy Sunday morning, she had just one idea in mind: learn about her family's past. Since her mother died, she became curious about where she came from. She tracked down her ancestors here, in Australia, and learned from other family members that her great-grandfather had been a part of a big project there. She wanted to learn more about it and thought that coming to this country could enlighten her. She got to her hotel room, unpacked everything, and went on a walk around Sydney. She watched the rain take over the sky and pour itself onto the city. Even though it was a Sunday afternoon, she found herself being the only one outside. As she grew colder, she felt like someone was watching her, but when she turned around, no one was there. Only the Sydney's Harbour Bridge was looming over her. She recalled having seen it before in pictures, but as she continued to stare at it, it somehow became bigger, grimmer. Shivers went down her spine. She couldn't shake that feeling away. Someone was calling her to this imposing infrastructure above the water. She tried to ignore it, but it seemed impossible. She couldn't resist it. She started slowly approaching the bridge. Her feet were as heavy as rocks. Each step brought her closer and closer to the thing that now scared her. Why was she doing this? As she was about to reach it, a chaotic scream startled her. When she turned around, a small old lady was staring at her with complete fear in her eyes.
"Don't go on the bridge. Bad bridge, bad bridge, bad bridge, bad bridge,"
she kept saying over and over and over again. Joe looked at her, clearly confused. The woman giggled creepily.
"You don't know what happened, do you? Abdonius, he knew."
The young woman gasped. She couldn't believe what she heard. How could this strange lady know her great-grandfather's name? It's impossible. She was pulled out of her thoughts by loud sirens. 3 policemen got out of their cars and were now walking hastily towards them.
"Miss Clay, we already talked about this,"
they said calmly to the old lady.
"You can't just run around everywhere with nobody. You're gonna get hurt. We both know that. Come on, let's get you home before you get yourself in trouble again."
While one of them escorted Miss Clay to the car, the other 2 took the time to explain the situation to Joe.
"We're so sorry about that, man. You see, Miss Clay is one of the few rebellious patients at the Sydney Institute. She always finds a way to get out without permission. Hope she wasn't any trouble."
Joe reassured them, and the men went their way. That night, Joe went home, her head filled with confused thoughts. Despite the fact that she was exhausted from her trip, she still couldn't get herself to fall asleep. She kept reliving the events of this afternoon, wondering what was wrong with Miss Clay. At one point, it was too much. She had been thinking about it for too long and needed answers now. It was midnight when she grabbed her coat and went back outside, heading to the Sydney Institute, her head loaded with unanswered questions. She had a bad feeling about it, but it still felt like the right thing to do. The only thing she could hear was the sound of each of her steps on the concrete as the water splashed the back of her calves. She could see the dim halo of the streetlights in the dark night. The cold air filled her lungs with each breath, letting out a light fog every time she exhaled.
She walked for about 40 minutes, looking up the direction on her phone. The building was standing before her, the Psychiatric Sydney Institute. Somehow it felt familiar, like she had been there before. She took a deep breath and went inside. She was walking toward the front desk. A young nurse came running to her, asking if she was there for Mr. Miller's panic attack. She nodded, not knowing who or what she was talking about. It was not strange for family members to come visit patients at night. Jo was simply relieved she got inside so easily without having to truly explain what her motives were. The nurse escorted her to the main room to wait for the patient. That's when it hit her. She remembered why this place felt so familiar. She had been there before, for her great-grandpa's funeral. She clearly remembered the sweet sorrow on her mother's face. She was sad that he'd left us, but knew he was in a better place. Time passed by, but the nurse had never come back. Jo started inspecting the room when a little detail caught her attention. On a sign was written in small letters, "Archive Room." An idea sparked her mind. Maybe she could finally know what happened. The young woman followed the indication in the eerie, dark hallway, lit by the few white flickering neon lights which gave every patient a deathly skin tone. She finally got there. The big archive room was filled with files. She used the flashlight on her phone to see. This room was a maze. She scanned the shelf filled with names and numbers and finally found it. Patient 306, Abdonia Smith. She pulled herself together and gathered the courage to take a peek. As she was reading the first few words, she became as white as a ghost. She couldn't understand what she was reading. She dropped the files on the ground and rushed out of the institute. Her heart was pounding. She was running as fast as she could, letting her feet guide her to the place that she now most feared. Had she known how this would end, she never would have come here, to this place, this horrible place. She saw them and knew what would happen. The 3 men that will haunt her mind until her very last breath. The next day, a young woman was found wandering on the bridge, mumbling about ghosts and murder. She was immediately admitted to the Sydney Institute, where she lived the rest of her life the same way her great-grandfather did. He had been admitted long ago, saying he was haunted by the 3 workers he presumably killed in the construction of the bridge.